Hi, this is Dr. Jeff Hanna, and I'm going to show you some of the introductory drills that you can be practicing at home, either in advance of this particular seminar or as just a general practice to develop the skills that you need to be able to do the HIO toggle recoil adjustment and also the Blair torque recoil adjustment. So when we are talking about these different kinds of adjustments, essentially what we are talking about is using a combination of our shoulders, elbows, and then hands to create a toggle type movement like this, and also to be able to introduce the element of torque, such as this, or the ability to maintain a three-dimensional contact all the way through. Now with this are going to be certain things that we have to be able to do with our hands, with our bodies. And in the beginning, if you're not familiar with these kinds of drills, or if you've not used these muscles in this particular way, you're probably going to find yourself feeling a little bit achy. But trust me, if you do this over time, you will find that the activity becomes easier to the point you're able to do it on a living person without really even having to think about it. It just becomes quite automatic. Now, I'm going to emphasize a few things as far as our contact point right in the beginning. And the contact point that I'm going to be emphasizing, this is true for all of the adjustments that you're going to be learning, is on this part of your hand, which is known as the distal pisiform. Now, I'm going to contrast this because if you were to just palpate and find on your own hand, you're going to find the bone sticking out right about here, or on the other side here, and that's going to be the bony pisiform. Do note that it can be different on the left side of your body versus the right side, so if it does feel a little different, don't worry. But my point is that we're not interested in making contact with that point in and of itself. The point that we are interested in with the Blair adjustments is going to be here on the distal pisiform, and again, this could be different for every person. So you can see that what I'm essentially doing with my own hand is there's a little groove that sits right in through there where you can create like a little shelf or a contact like that. It's not so that we can shove anything into place, but so that we can actually maintain a contact around a segmental contact point, either an atlas or an axis, to be able to guide the vertebra any number of different directions. So same thing over here. We're not talking about this point, we're talking about this space right over here as we would be making movements like this. So I want you to keep that in mind as we be practicing all of the drills, just to keep in mind that we're going to be using distal pisiform as one of the important contacts. Now, what I need to show you next is how you're going to actually be maintaining control of your hand to be able to turn it into an adjusting instrument. This is a very classic drill in HIO or upper cervical care, and it's called a 5-point prayer drill. The idea being is that in order to expose and make that distal pisiform as strong and as tight as you possibly can, because we don't want things to be willy-nilly, loosey, sloppy. Otherwise, when we go to make the adjustment, the force does not go in the correct way. So what we need to be able to do is to make sure that we develop muscle tone so that our hand is utterly rigid, and an extension so that any of the movement that we're doing is going to be coming either from shoulder or from elbow, depending on the adjustment we need to do. So the exercise is going to look like this. You start with your hands in this position as if saying a prayer. Truth be it doesn't matter for the sake of this exercise if you're doing it like this with your fingers pointing straight up, or if your fingers are pointing out like this. Doesn't really matter. So that's step number one. Just put your fingers together, and what you will see that I am doing on purpose is I am extending my elbows away from my body, and what that's doing is creating as close to a 90-degree angle like this. We are going to be creating a position with our hand that will look like this when we're all said and done. So pay attention that the wrist is not flat in any way. It's going to be up like this, cocked up. So that's number one. Number two, spread your fingers all the way apart like this, keeping the palms of your hands together and keeping that 90-degree hand to wrist relationship like this. This overall, pretty easy. The next part is the part where it's going to start to be challenging you a little bit if you've never done this. And I'm going to draw your attention to your wrist bones, to your carpals, then to your metacarpals up through here, and then the phalanges right here. So where I'm going to be drawing your attention to are going to be your knuckles, like this. So the intersection between your metacarpals and then the phalanges, okay? Because what we are going to be doing is we are going to be flexing the hand at that part only. So we're going to maintain the angle that we have with the wrist, and then we're going to be bending at the knuckles only. So pay attention what is happening with my fingers here. My fingers are not curling like making a fist. My fingers are actually staying relatively straight. So as we would do this, you're going to be keeping your palms together. And let me come forward and step just a little bit closer, just like this, okay? So you are going to be flexing at your knuckles, keeping the tips of all of your fingers together, and you're also going to keep your pisiform, your hypothenar pad, and then also your thenar pad with your thumb all in contact. So the tips of your fingers and then your thenar and hypothenar, they do not separate as you are flexing like this. Now, do also pay attention that we said, okay, you need to flex the fingers like this, but at the same time, you have to maintain that sharp wrist angle. So it does no good to go from this position here and to bend your fingers, but at the sake of it, you come like this. Because then, look what you've done, you've flattened out your wrist. This needs to stay cocked up as much as possible. If you're feeling the muscles burn, good, you're using the right ones here. So the wrists or the elbows stay apart as much as you can. They will go down some, yes, but you'll separate the hands like this, and you will see that what we're doing is essentially creating a little hollow in your hand like that, so you can kind of see through. So out of the different mistakes, we've already mentioned that what you can do is you could say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to make my hand go flat. You got to keep that high arch. The other major mistakes that can happen as you're doing this drill is you can kind of bend your fingers like this, say, okay, yep, I did it. No, because what you've done is you've rounded your fingers off. Those fingers have to stay straight so that the only bend is occurring at your knuckles and then at your wrist. Okay? Now, the other mistake that you could do in the process of doing this is this. So what I've done is, okay, I was successfully maintaining contact with, or the bend at my wrist. I successfully did the bend at my knuckles only, but look what I did. I lost the finger separation. The finger separation is what's going to create that distal pisiform and going to make it become firm. When you start to shrink your hand like this, it starts to get squishy and spongy. It's not going to be as powerful or near as effective an adjustment what we're trying to achieve here. So, going through all of that again, it's a lot of details for one basic little practice drill. Fingers together, hands apart like this. Separate the fingers, and then keeping that relationship and that high arch, bend at the knuckles only, keeping your fingertips, pisiform, and thenar pad all together. That's number 3. Now, part 4 of this drill is where what you're going to do is you are going to, starting with your thumbs, you're going to separate the thumb, then the finger, then the index finger. Basically what you're doing is you're opening your hands out like this. And the purpose of that is so that you can separate the hands and say, okay, like we have holding 2 bits of water like that, this is going to be the position that we are going to be doing in order to make the adjustment. The only difference is that we're going to be having it with it positioned down like that. But for the sake of the drill, simply put, we hold our hands like this. And guess what? Hold this position as long as you can. Again, if you're new to this, you're probably going to find that, wow, in between my fingers is burning. This part of my hand is burnt, like, oh, it feels like this is hard here. This is because you're not used to using these muscles in this way. That's okay. So what you would do is you would hold your hand in this position for as long as you can comfortably A good idea is if you are at home watching TV, sitting in class, not having to write any notes or anything like that, but just hold your hands in this position as long as you can so that you feel in the burn. Now, when you can't take it anymore, here's what you do. Step number 5. You bring your pinky and your hypothenar back together, okay? And then you do the reverse of what you did in step 4, where you bring your fingertips back together and bring it all together again like this. The reason that you do that as the final part of this drill is to find out what did you actually successfully do. So, as I had just illustrated for you, and I've been doing this again for a little bit while, is that I was able to do this. I had my hands out like this for, I don't know, what was that, 60 seconds or so, and then I brought the whole thing back together, and it was exactly in the same position when we started. If you're not used to this, okay, you might say, okay, position 4, I'm holding my hands, I'm holding my hands, I'm holding my hands, okay. Now bring them together, and what you find, oops, you held your hand position, but you lost your arch. Or you could say, okay, yep, I'm holding him, and then you put them back together. Oh, you didn't hold the bending at your knuckles near as much. So the final step is the way of checking yourself to make sure that you are actually holding that as long as possible. And if not, which part do you need to continue to work on in order to improve things as much as possible? So, as a very, very quick recap of those 5 steps. Fingers together like this. Making sure we've got the bend at the wrist, high arch. Number 2, separate the fingers like this, maintaining wrist bend. Number 3, keep the wrist bend and bend only at your knuckles, keeping fingertips and pisiform and thenar pad together. Number 4, from the thumb outwards, separate them like this and hold. You can move it into the different positions, including if you want to like this. Hold that as long as you can, and when it's all said and done, bring it back together like that as a way of checking yourself to see how much you were able to maintain. So that is the 5-point prayer drill used to develop this concept of a, quote, high arch, which is necessary to expose the distal pisiform, which is your contact point to deliver the effective Blair adjustment. The next drill we're going to show you is about tissue pull, because you can create the best high arch pisiform, have exact contact, but if in the act of trying to set up on your segmental contact point, that is the part of the vertebra that you want to adjust, if you do not get the right amount of tissue slack out of the way, then that force that you put in is going to just be slipping and sliding all over the place. In Blair and upper cervical, we talk about the idea of a snug contact. What a snug contact means is that you've used just enough tissue pull so that there's not going to be any give or any slack like that. It doesn't mean that you're actually pushing hard. In fact, the lighter you do this, the better. How much force should you use? Typically speaking, about as much as you would use to palpate or feel your pulse. If you just want to get a general feel for it also, you can use the skin on the back of your hand and find out, okay, well, how much force does it actually take if you would to iron out some of the creases? That's what we are talking about. But when you go to the effort of ironing out the creases, then it's a matter of, okay, you have to use one hand in order to get the tissue pull, and then you have to use your other hand in order to get the proper contact. So how do you manage to get the tissue pull, but then bring your contact hand properly to make sure that you're in the right spot? Because your contact or your adjusting hand is not the one that you should ever be using for doing your tissue pull. It's just going to be introducing slop, promise you. So this is the standard approach when we are looking to establish a contact. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the 3 most sensitive pads of your fingers, and I'm just going to do this on my thigh. You can do this on anything else. In fact, I actually recommend that you do this on a video game controller because it gives you a good sense of what you are looking for, or if you have any additional practice devices that are chiropractic specific, of course those are going to work. So what you would do, number 1, is you use the 3 fingers like this to palpate around, and just, we'll say we'll find a spot, something like this, you know, the edge of my kneecap, maybe something like that. That'll do. And you settle it in there, again, lighter the better, and you're going to use typically then your middle finger as the way of isolating. This is the particular spot that we want. So you're going to establish a tissue pull, doing it whatever angle is necessary for the particular adjustment, until you say, okay, I've gotten the slack out of my pants, or if you would, the slack out of the tissue here, so that this finger now is solid. But now what you need to do is you need to be able to bring your contact hand up and over the top of that finger. This is the reason why I showed you first how to do your high arch drills, because if you can't hold your high arch for more than 2 seconds, the second that you try to settle it in on top of a contact, the whole thing is going to fall apart, and then you're going to try to reestablish it, and that's going to introduce the slop that I talked about. So you need to be able to hold this with a certain degree of confidence as you are establishing your tissue pull. So I found the spot with my 3 fingers, then I isolated just the one. Now, what I need to do is I need to get so that my distal pisiform is going to hook on this spot, basically right over the top of it. So your hand will come down. I'm going to try to illustrate this as best as I can from the angles. So you bring your distal pisiform down on your finger, make sure that you do not introduce any skin slack, and then pull that finger away. This hand should not slide any extra like this. If it's going to come in, it should be where it hooks, and it's got it set and firm. One of the reasons, again, I actually recommend using a video game controller is because it's going to be approximately the right size. It's going to have approximately the right resistance or the feel that you're looking for with the tissue pull. But as you would bring your distal pisiform over the top, what you will find is that if you get your hand in the wrong position, it's actually going to slide off the analog stick like this. If, however, you've got your hand in the correct position, it's going to stick and it's not going to move 1 iota. And then you'll actually be able to feel and to know, okay, this is exactly how you do it. Some people, what they do is they try to aim for their distal pisiform on their fingernail. What I personally do, because this is my case, is I have to aim for the edge of my finger. Because everybody's hands are built different, you are going to have to find what formula is going to work for you. But again, 3 fingers, establish the skin pull, the tissue pull, no slack, isolate the one spot. Set your other hand proper, bring in distal pisiform on the spot, hook it, and then hold. Now, this is also not the time where you're going to want be letting your hand relax additionally. And I'm going to add that what you do not want to do is you do not want to bring your contact hand and then immediately start pushing really, really hard. Because what that's going to do is that's going to engage the tissues below, cause the muscles to tighten up, and then it's going to cause your adjustment to be less effective. So same thing, you want to make sure you don't have any tissue slack here, but in the same breath, you've got to make sure that you have adequately grabbed that just light enough so that there isn't any additional slack, so that when you go to make the adjustment, whatever force is coming from your body through your hand is properly transmitted into the adjusted segment. I'm going to show you now some of the classic toggle recoil or Palmer HIO toggle recoil adjusting drills, where in brief we need to develop the coordinated skill between our pec muscles and our triceps. The adjustment that is a toggle recoil is essentially using the pec muscle to generate power like this, or the power portion of the toggle mechanism. But this is not a case of slamming a bone hard into place like this. The key is actually specificity, and it is speed. So it's power that's generated from the pec, but then delivered through a very quick snapping action like this of the triceps. So we need to learn how to coordinate these 2 muscles at the same time, but in the right amount in the same breath. So we're going to start with the pecs first. The pec muscles, what they essentially do is they are what bring your arms into adduction, so towards the body like this. There's a variety of different ways of actually engaging the pec muscles. Most people, they're actually overdeveloped to a certain degree, which is why their hands roll forwards like this, and they all are so muscular like that. So most people, the power of the pec is not an issue. It's just a matter then of fine-tuning it to get it to do what we need it to do. The classic drill in HIO or toggle recoil is going to look like this, where simply put, you bring your hands together and you cross them over like this. Doesn't matter exactly how you hold your hand, and what you're going to be doing, if I can illustrate for you, is you just rapidly contract your pec muscles that causes your hands to push into each other like this. So I'm showing it to you, illustrating what it would look like if your hands are not together. So this is the general kind of movement. You're not going all the way far or it's across your body like this. It's just that little bit of rapid contraction going maybe only about that far. This is one of the reasons why it's advantageous to hold your hands like this, because what you're essentially doing is you're pushing into your biceps. When you push into your biceps, you can only push so far because you're just going to hit the resistance of your arm. This is a good way of calibrating your depth because, as we said, you don't want to slam things like this. A vertebral joint is typically about 1 to 2 centimeters. That's it. And most of the misalignments then are going to be even smaller than that. So you don't need to push the thing this far. Your pec is certainly capable of that, but that's going to be overkill. So it's just developing the feel and the speed to be able to rapidly contract your pec muscles like this. Nothing fancier than that. You can do this one flipping both sides, just like that, as a good way of warming up and developing the coordination right there. Pecs are pretty easy. Triceps, in all honesty, is a little bit trickier. And this is something I can tell it to you through a video, but it's something where the reality is you have to feel this. And it's because what a lot of people will do when they are trying to do this kind of a movement with their bodies the first times, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to use their biceps to do a pushing movement like this. And so then the adjustment's going to look jerky, like they're trying to push down, like you're giving somebody CPR or something like that. When the reality is we need the triceps to essentially extend the arm. That's where our speed is going to be. I will oftentimes give the analogy as if cracking a whip. So you'd have the whip and then you would do this kind of a movement where it's a snapping action with the triceps. The difference is that as opposed to it being at this angle or like two of them at the same time, it's going to be more at this angle off to the side. So there's a few different ways that you can start to wake up and get the idea of engaging the triceps here. So if you just want to get the idea of being able to flex the triceps, this is going to be the case where what we are doing is we are just letting the arms hang down at our side like this. And what we're going to do, we're not even going to worry about hand position, but I don't want your hands like this. I want you to turn it so that your thumbs are pointing at each other. There's a reason for this, and it's because the proper setup for any and all of these adjustments is so that your elbows are making a hinge and they are directly facing each other like this. When you start to introduce or collapse your elbows in like this, your adjustment force will not go the right way. The elbows have to be directly across from one another so that the force is going to go down exactly the way that you want. So, for the point being, I'm just saying put your hands flat facing like this. Let them relax, and all I want you to do is to just do this. So what I am doing, as you can see, I'm not trying to push down because that's going to be engaging the biceps. I simply want from the relaxed position for you to extend your elbow like this. And what you're seeing is that my hand is moving more laterally away from the body. I am not pushing down, that's the biceps. I am going away like this. That's what it's like to engage the triceps. And then you're going to do it on the other side. There's not an exact number. This is just a case to get feel. Okay? And you can, of course, you can do them both at the same time and try to coordinate them. Now, what I would also encourage you as you're doing this, because you see I've gone from now the position of where I'm actively trying to move it out like this, to now where I'm just trying to do a light little flick. So as opposed to the muscles on, off, I'm trying to just flick, flick, flick. And if you're doing this in front of a mirror, what you should see again is you should see where your hands are actually moving away from your body, not going down. Because if they're going down, odds are you're using your biceps, at least in this particular case. That will change when we start to combine the hands and the pecs at the same time. But for the sake of this drill here, what we want to see is we want to see where your elbows are trying to flick away from you. This is something that is supposed to feel smooth and easy. I'm a firm advocate, easy, light, smooth in that order. If you're finding that you have to force something, this isn't right, especially when people try to do this stuff fast. Like all of the docs who have been doing this for 20, 30 years, in their effort to try to be fast, they're actually going to become sloppy. Things are not going to be near as effective. And so, what we're talking about here is just making it light and easy here. Flick, 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 flick. You get the idea. Now I'm going to show you what it looks like when we incorporate part of the pec drill, which this triceps flick that we just introduced. Don't worry just yet about firm hand positions or anything like that. This is a practice drill. So you just loosely grab your hands like this, letting them hang down in front of you like this. So now, because we're actually holding the hands in place, we're not going to be able to get our hands to separate like this. Now we're going to see where they start to go down in this kind of a movement. What I need you to do is to let your arms hang at their side. I'm trying to illustrate so that you can also see that my elbows have approximately the same amount of bend. One is not like this and the other is like this. They're pretty loose down like this. And so what we're going to do is we are going to do smooth. Again, don't try to be fast. Try to be smooth. Coordinations between where your pec muscles are going to come together, and at the same time, you're going to engage with these triceps that will look like this. And you'll see that what I'm doing is it has a smooth bounce to it. If I was to start doing this, and you see what I'm doing is I'm pushing again with my biceps. That is not correct. There should be a smooth bounce as you do this. If you pushing it, if you're not getting any rebound coming up like that, then odds are you're using the wrong muscle. This is one of the reasons why when you see people do toggle recoil adjustments, they make the adjustment and then their hands come up back like this towards their chest. It's because they've engaged their triceps to such a degree that the recoil brings it up like this. Now I'm going to make the caution for you, is that if you are using that kind of a rebound, it is a good way of following through. Make sure that it hits you in the chest, because if you start practicing like this, where you see where your hands are recoiling off sideways like that, your force vector went the wrong way. So we have to keep it easy and smooth, coming back to the same part. So this should be the case where what you can do is it should be, you can do repetition after repetition, and it's just a matter of smoothness. I think that you can see that in the video, that what I'm trying to do is that, okay, this is a relatively smooth, mechanical-like movement like this as I'm engaging my triceps. I'm also doing it way quicker than I encourage you at this point. Simply put though, is I don't want to be seeing, you'll be trying to push anything down like this. This is more where your upper body is not moving, it's your arms only, and they are bouncing back at you. The better the bounce, then you know the better that you are actually engaging your triceps. Now, if you're still struggling with that concept, then what I may encourage you to do is a little drill like this. This is actually a side posture toggle table. It's going to be approximately 500 millimeters off the ground. So a stool, standard chair, anything like that will do. Simply put, what you do is you imagine that you are getting into a push-up position of sorts. Now, what you can see is that, basically my weight is all in the upper part of my body. I could bring it closer if I want, but I want the upper weight in the upper part of my body. Pay attention. What I've also done is I made sure that I brought my arm or my elbows so that as I'm doing the position, I'm not doing a push-up like this. I'm doing it as if it's going to be in this toggle position like that. So you can bring it all together like this, straighten your elbows out, and then you introduce only the tiniest bit of bend right here. And what you can do, if you're so inclined, and be careful if you ever have a shoulder injury, don't do this. But what you're going to do is from that slight elbow bend position, you're going to push your body up and away. And what that will do is that will cause you automatically to engage your pec muscles and your triceps. If you find yourself where your body is actually moving down towards the table, what you're doing is you're using your biceps. That is not correct. You're doing it backwards. So your body should move, when you do that contraction, should move away. Now be careful that you're not doing something like this, stiff arming and just sort of leaning away. If you're leaning away, then you're using your body to try to fake it. You're not really using your triceps at all under those circumstances. So what I would encourage you, if you're still struggling, is you can do this again to just get a little bit of that basic feel that's necessary for this tricep activation movement like that. So good luck with these. I need to show you now how to bring your stabilization hand in. Some different schools of thought call it the indifferent hand. I disagree with this. And it's because even though our contact hand may be the one that is doing the predominant amount of the work, the stabilization hand is the one that makes sure that it's able to coordinate it and keep things together. If we try to do things one-handed, we're apt to become very sloppy. So the stabilization, as far as I'm concerned, is just as important as make sure that you've gone to the effort of using and establishing the right contact with your hand, making sure that you're going to be creating the right kind of tool, making sure that you've done the tissue pull correctly to know that you're in the right spot, but then also to know that when you go ahead and apply that tool, it's going to be used in the right way. Now I'm going to show you a slight over-exaggeration of how this is done, but it will illustrate the point nicely. Now I also want you to keep in mind that there are a couple of variations for how this is done with a toggle recoil or a torque recoil adjustment, but we will get the idea and you will find out as you are introduced to the technique how and when these different maneuvers are applied. So for the sake of argument, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this one here my contact hand. So I would have been able to create the high arch pisiform, bending at the knuckles like this, and we can imagine that we would be doing the distal pisiform contact. Now, what we do with the stabilization hand for the adjustments here, typically speaking, the stabilization hand does not need to be near as rigid as the contact hand, but as a general rule, you're going to find a lot of upper cervical docs, they still follow out of habit the same pattern of making the same shape or the same general shape with their hand like this. So I'm going to show you a little spot you need to know about. It is called the anatomical snuff box, which if I'm extending my hand out like this, thumb like that, it's this little area right there between the tendons. In brief, that is where we are going to want the pisiform of our stabilization hand to come in like this. Now there's a process for how that is done. Again, I am going to show you the over-exaggerated version of this, but I will also emphasize the better or the more cleanly that you do this stabilization move, the better your adjustment will ultimately be because it will have more control. So you've got the hand like this. Your opposite hand will come in like that, and you'll sometimes see the old-time docs where they bring their hand all the way up to their forearm. And what they do then is they will start to drag their hand or that pisiform down along their forearm until it finally arrives in that anatomical snuff box like this. And then they will do one of two things. Either number one, they will wrap their hand to stabilize the wrist like this with the thumb wrapped under, or what they will do is they will bring it in like that, and then they will just keep that thumb up along the side like this. This in Blair is what we call an adjustment with thumb wrap and no thumb wrap. As a general rule, for the ones where we are introducing a torque, you don't want to use a thumb wrap because you're just going to bust your thumb. If, however, it's a straight toggle, then you do have the thumb wrap because you're going to have a more controlled force vector. Now, what I want to draw to your attention here is going to be this. It's that when you've gone to the effort of maintaining or establishing a contact with your contact hand, with the stabilization hand, by bringing it along your forearm, and I want to show you what I'm doing with my shoulder and with my elbow. that as I am dragging it along like this, what you're going to see is I am externally rotating like this at my shoulder and at my elbow. And there's going to be a reason I'm doing that in just a sec, you will see. So it comes down around my forearm, and then as I hit the anatomical snuff box, that's pretty much when I'm finishing this external roll to right here. Now let me show you what I have created right here. So by bringing that elbow in like this, and by establishing that roll out down along here, what I have done is I have been able to bring my elbows in opposition, creating that toggle type mechanism that is a part of the toggle recoil and that we use to a certain degree in the torque recoil. What I oftentimes see docs do, and I will catch myself doing this when I'm getting out of practice or if I'm getting sloppy, is we just try to bring the elbow in like this and say, okay, yeah, that's good enough. I've got my hand in the right stabilization spot. Well, go ahead and look at my toggle mechanism right now. I've got way more elbow bend on this side than I do on the opposite side. So when I try to apply a force, it's not going to go where I want it to go. So in the act of setting up your stabilization, if you take the extra time, and again, it doesn't take that long. That's all the length of time it actually takes. I'm just showing you the exaggerated version of bringing this along and then externally rotating that shoulder. Well, if I think about it, it's actually internally rotating the shoulder, externally rotating the elbow. But if you do that, that is going to make it so that your elbows are across from each other, so that whether the adjustment is done like this, or if the adjustment is going to be done like that, you're going to have much better control over the entire process. So that's the way that that needs to be done, and as always, we practice it on both sides. If I haven't said so already, one of the things that you will quickly discover when you're doing your practice adjustments is that one side is actually easier than the other. This is actually very, very common. It's because we are not the same on the left side or the right side. We have one-handed dominance. Even people who are ambidextrous, they still do different things with their hands. So don't worry if you do notice these kinds of differences. It may simply mean, like the rest of us, you have to do a little bit more practice on one side of the body than you do on the other. Hopefully this explanation then of stabilization in general will be of additional value again for helping out with the actual adjustment. We've now gotten to the point where I can show you how to bring all of the bits and pieces together for the standard toggle recoil type of adjustment. This is going to be akin to a nail and a hammer, if you would. Now, I am not going to be showing you this video for the purpose of showing you how we actually need to line our body up and how we will be adapting this adjustment for people with different shaped bones, etc., etc. That we will reserve for the rest of the part of the seminar here. But I'm going to be showing you the general drill and the way that you can start putting all of these pieces together so that you can actually start doing a toggle recoil style of adjustment. Now, I will caution, and by all means, feel free to give this adjustment a go and this practice drill a go. But number one, never, ever, ever do this on a living, breathing person as far as practice. Only when you are absolutely certain that they need this very kind of adjustment. Otherwise, you can cause very significant damage. And number two is that, as I had said before, easy, light, smooth, then fast. So make sure that you get the general feel, the smooth, the easiness of, or the ease of all of the other ones that we've done here, and don't try to force this too much all at once. Otherwise, in your effort to try to make it fast, you're going to introduce bad habits, which are going to follow you. Bad habits are very hard to break. If you make a mistake with the adjustment setup, you know what, that's actually relatively easy to correct. But if you try to be lightning fast when you don't have the subtle bits and pieces, or you try to skip steps in the process, then it's very difficult to go back and to correct things. So we're going to show you now how to actually do these drills. And what we're going to be using is we're going to be using my side posture toggle recoil table. It's approximately, well, if you were to imagine that a head was this high, person lying on their side on the table, that's going to be just around somewhere about 500 to 540 millimeters off the ground. So basically something like this. So what you can do is you can take I'll show you that the mechanism goes up by about 1.5 centimeters and goes down like that. And do pay attention. I can do that with a couple of fingers. So this is not an extremely forceful adjustment. about 5 kilos, that's it. So if you have a portable drop mechanism, a speeder board, an extremity board, something like that, that will work perfect. Just set it on a chair, there's how you can practice it. If you don't have one, okay, it's gonna be a little harder, but you can find a football or something like that, something that's firm but also has some give to it, so you can still practice these different kinds of drills and these kinds of mechanisms. So let's go ahead and show you what things would look like. And I've tried to line the camera up so that I'm at the edge here of the table. As I said, we're not worried about how we actually would be lining up the different parts of our body to do this. This is just raw practice. So when we do this particular adjustment, the side that is going to be facing the patient's head versus their body, that is going to be the one that we're going to be establishing with our contact hand. And if you are using a portable drop, please pay attention. It's that the drop part is on the bottom part of the headpiece. The drop part is not up here. So if you are practicing, the drop part should be at this edge. So what you would do is you would imagine you've got a certain contact point, and this is just for practice sake. You can do the effort if you want of doing a tissue pull, establishing, and then bringing that distal pisiform in where you want. You can go to that degree if you want, but you're fine when you start doing the repetitions. For the sake of it, you just set the hand like that. So you can combine the different drills, you get the idea. So what you do is you would bring your hand in like this. Pay attention that this is minimal elbow bend. I am not like this, and I am not rigid like this. I'm talking about like that little bit because, again, that's the entirety of the adjustic thrust right there. So you've got the contact hand established where you want to at the drop end of the table. And I usually recommend that what you would do is you lift the cock headpiece right there, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to get into the habit of having real people hold it. Oh wait, now I got to do this, because the longer that the person's lying there, the more tense they're going to get and the less effective the adjustment's going to be. So if you are going to use the drop mechanism, I recommend bring the drop up as you would get that hand into the right contact right about there. Then what you do is you bring your stabilization hand in following that protocol. So you'd see what I did was I brought it, elbow goes out, and the stabilization pisiform in the anatomical snuff box. With a toggle recoil, almost always we are going to use a wrap. So the thumb goes around the wrist like this. And pay attention at my elbows. See, the elbows came immediately to the same angle. I am not like this, and I am not like this. As you are learning this, check yourself. And in fact, here's how I recommend you do check yourself. Before you thrust, extend your elbows all the way out like that, so you can see, is there equal elbow bend? If you were going to be like this, if you were to extend them, you'll see that things are going to go kind of wonky and skewy. So, hands in place, other hand comes in, and then you just do that toggle mechanism. It's that combined action that we talked about of the triceps flick like this, activated with your pec muscles. And when you do that, that bounce should bring your hands back to the middle part of your chest. As I said, if you end up coming sideways like this, or if you end up where your body starts going down towards the table, you're not doing it right. I know that there is a different style of toggle recoil where what we see is we see people bringing their body down like this. That is not what we're teaching you. We're teaching you where the action is coming with control from the arms only. So my body is not dropping. And what you do is you can just do reps like this. You do as much as you want. You will find after a period of time, you start getting tired, you start getting sloppy. That's a good time to take a break, because you can't force it. Now, what I'm also going to emphasize if you're doing this drill is do not what's called bottom out. So as I said, a typical drop mechanism, and the adjustment we want to do has a depth of approximately 15 millimeters. So bottoming out would be, or let me just rewind. The concept that we want is we want for the hand to be down and then coming back out before that table hits the bottom. That's what's going to allow for the recoil part of the adjustment to occur. This is the toggle. The recoil is what happens with the vertebra on the inside. That's what the vibration of the table helps to facilitate. But if we bottom out, and by bottom out I mean this, and then bring your hand up after you've hit the bottom, pushed it maybe even a little farther, then you don't have that opportunity to recoil. That is a completely different style of adjustment. With this one here, our aim is to be as light and quick as we can so that the body can have the best possible chance of correcting things on itself. So it's part of the reason why we don't want you starting with your elbows with this much bend, because then you're going to be apt to slam it down like that. Minimal elbow bend so that if anything, you're going to err too light. It's always easier to be too light and build up if you have to than it is to be too hard and then try to back it off from there. So you do this as much as you want to the point of fatigue. That is your basic toggle recoil style of adjustment. Now what I'm going to show you last are the elements for creating the torque recoil style of adjustment. This is the Blair adjustment. I am not going to be showing you all the bits and pieces of how to put this together, but I can nevertheless show you the practice drill for how you can start to get the general feel and the movement for how this is done. This style of adjustment, Dr. Blair, when he was teaching his courses, he did not teach you this until you had attended his 5-day X-ray analysis course first. Then you had to submit films to the point where he was personally satisfied that you knew what you were doing so that he could show you this adjustment, because he and the other chiropractors of this era believed when you started to introduce torque, if you did it in the wrong way, you could create way more damage than you could with the standard toggle recoil adjustment. In fact, it may be part of the reason why this adjustment, even though it was practiced very similarly in the BJ Palmer Research Clinic, they did not teach this to the students. Number one, they struggled with, okay, how do we break this down into the different components? Dr. Blair was able to break it down in a way so that the rest of us mere mortals were able to do so. But same thing, they knew that if they start showing all of the students this is what you do without a thorough, in-depth understanding about this is where you do it, this is how you do it, this is when you don't do it, that you could cause some very, very serious damage. So what I'm going to show you, I want you to take it with that level of respect, which is why I'm not showing you all the bits and pieces, and I'm not going to explain why and when this is appropriate. You can nevertheless start practicing the elements to make you better. So we had used the analogy with the standard toggle recoil adjustment of a hammer and nail. This is going to be something where I want you to use the visualization more of a screwdriver. And in order for a screwdriver to work, it is not a matter of set the screw in place and then just, tap it like this. In order for a screwdriver to work, it has to maintain contact all the way through in order to produce this kind of a movement. In a nutshell, that is what we are trying to do in this way. So the visualization and the exercise that was developed by Dr. Weldon Munsey, Dr. Blair's successor, was the following drill like this. You would say, okay, and we're going to be doing this on the illustration of the wall, but you can also do this as if it was on the floor. I want you to imagine that out of this wall was a big, long spike coming straight out at us like that. And then me, in my geniusness, decided to be bored to take my distal pisiform in this position, we've already talked about it, and go wham like that onto the spike. Or if you would, bang like this, okay? Now, if I have impaled my distal pisiform on that spike, and let's say, okay, it's on there, so I can't move it sideways, I can't move it, I can move it up and down, probably not a good idea. But if I wanted to turn my hand, how would I do that? And the action would look basically like this, right? You can move it, you can just pivot around like that, but that would be the movement. That is one of the keys to getting this Blair torque recoil adjustment to work correctly. It's the visualization that, not a spike on the wall, but a spike on the floor, where the person would be lying atlas transverse exposed, is that you are going to take that distal pisiform, you're going to jam it on that spike here, and then what you need to do is you need to be able to turn your hand over like this, maintaining contact all the way through. Okay? So the movement that we're talking about is something that will look like this. Nothing so simple. Spike right here, turning the hand over like this. And practice this slowly on both sides. I still do this particular exercise every single day ad nauseum, and it's in part because I can slip just like anybody else. Same thing is, you'll probably notice that one side is easier than the other. And in fact, I encourage you to use your finger as you're developing this initial feel of things like this. Now I'm going to illustrate a few things because in the simplicity you're thinking, okay, that's it. You'd be blown away just how many different ways there are of mucking this up. So I'm going to illustrate one of the first things here for you. And I'm going to use the example of somebody that I would imagine everybody this day, whether you follow comic books or not, is familiar with, Wolverine. So Wolverine, if you don't know, is the guy who's got the claws that come out of his hand. Reality is that the claws are embedded in the forearm here. So one along the ulna, one on the radius, and then one in the middle. And typically what Wolverine does is, if he wants to bring the claws out, is he brings his fist like this, and then the claws are going to come out like that in between his knuckles. Now what I want you to do is I want you to imagine if Wolverine decided he didn't want to punch somebody, but he wanted to face slap them or face palm like this. So what the claws would do instead is they would come out of the hand like that. Now I want you to think about what this would be like if we were talking about the claw on the ulna side only. And let's say that we do not supinate, pronate the hand, but we keep the hand properly supinated like this, and we come like that. How's that claw going to come out? That claw is going to come out like that, from the distal pisiform, as if it's the exact same as that pivot point right there. So, the reason I say this is because when we were doing this practice drill, it's important that you try to keep your arm in a supinated position. So you'll see that when I am starting the position, I'm actually doing so where my fingers are above my hand like this. Now I can cheat and I can do it like this with my elbow down, but by bringing the elbow up, what it does is it helps to ensure that I keep my hand in supination. This is a little bit more of an advanced detail, but I'm just pointing it out for consideration right now, that as you're starting this, I would actually encourage you to do so with your shoulder up, like this. So that when you're starting, your fingers are on the top, and then your palm is going to be below. Now let me show you 3 over-exaggerated ways that you can do this wrong. These are the 3 most common ones. Number 1 is doing what's called scooping or traveling. Let me over-exaggerate this for you. So, scooping or traveling would be if you establish contact point, and then when you go to make your turn, your pisiform ends up way over in another spot, or like this. So when we would do the adjustment, it would look like the hand moving all the way over here. For this adjustment to work proper, we must maintain contact and control directly over the top. So even though our body will move in different ways with all of these different adjustments, that distal pisiform has to stay on top of the contact like this. It must not scoop sideways and it must not travel, because if it does, your force went somewhere completely where it doesn't belong. So scooping, traveling, that's error number 1. Error number 2 is what's called leading with the elbow. Leading with the elbow is going to look like this. Let me actually show you the correct way first. So we start in the position like this, and I want you to pay attention what is happening with the action of my shoulder, with my pisiform, and of my elbow here, okay? So we're going to do it from the side like that, and then I'm going to do it like this. And what I want you to see is I want you to see that my fingers and my arm are all finishing at the same time. This is a movement that Dr. Blair calls a pisiform lead. It's where your pisiform is essentially leading this movement. Your elbow is not doing the action. The action is actually happening at your shoulder like this. but it's the pisiform that is leading that movement here, okay? So that's what it looks like. My fingers are finishing at the same time. Leading with the elbow will look like this. You start in this position, but what you're gonna do is you're gonna let your elbow start the activity to here. It's gonna hit your side, and have a look, my hand has not come all the way over, and then you will do this. So from the front view, it will look like this. I've led with my elbow, and then I turned my hand a little bit more at the end. So this is the correct movement. Hand and elbow finish at the same time. Leading with the elbow looks like this. It's where you've done the right thing, but in the wrong order. That will not allow for the torque transmission to occur properly with this adjustment. So on the other side, leading with the elbow is going to be where your elbow comes in and then your hand turns over after the fact, or like this. Versus all of it turning over at the same time. You may not, especially if you try to start doing the actual drills too fast, you may not catch that. That's why I'm showing you the drill slowly now, because if you can't do this slow, there's no way you're ever going to be able to do it fast. And oftentimes we won't be able to catch this unless we are looking on a high-speed kind of camera. Fortunately, we've all got the ability to do so with the technology in our pockets these days. But I'm going to draw you to this attention that you do not want to be leading with the elbow and then turning the hand over. So that's going to be mistake number 2. Mistake number 3 is going to be called cheating. And it's cheating with what's called a body drop. So I'm going to draw to your attention this same movement here. And I want you now to pay attention to which way my palm is facing here, okay? So the starting point of the adjustment is with my palm facing you. Now as we do the movement, pay attention that my palm is basically still facing you the entire movement, okay? And think about it, because if this is the edge of our screwdriver, or a screwdriver coming out like this, Wolverine claw, spike on the wall, whatever, we need it to stay in that orientation the whole way as we're turning it around. Cheating is going to look like this. Cheating is where you start in the right position and you finish in the right position. At least you didn't travel, but what you ended up doing was you ended up making it so that your palm is now facing in the opposite direction. So instead of you getting from A to B like this, you got from A to B by turning your hand over like that. Now what this is going to cause the adjustment to do is this will not be a torque adjustment. This essentially is going to be a toggle recoil adjustment where you thrust down and then you just came back at you like this. And the way that this is most commonly going to look when you start to do this particular practice drill on your own is you will come into the position here like this, and then when you do the movement, your hand is going to come back at you, palm up like this, and you will probably also do the body drop. The body drop is what we see is where the old toggle recoil guys will thrust down and then their body leans down like this. The practice drill that I've been showing you can be done not just in this position, but when you've got it in this position, do it like this, where your fingers are actually pointing down to the floor, and then do the maneuver like that. So this is the correct movement that we are looking for these adjustments like that. So I'm bringing my elbow, my fingers, as you can see, they're pointing down to the floor. The reason I'm bringing my shoulder like this is because you can see that mimics the same position right here, fingers to the floor. And then I am using pisiform lead, bringing the elbow in. But what I am not doing is I am not thrusting down and bringing this back up at me. Because what that's going to do is that's essentially going to create a toggle recoil kind of movement, which will work a good chunk of the time, but it is not the same kind of procedure in the movement that we're going to be aiming to do with these Blair torque recoil adjustments. So those are a lot of details for the simple action of what it's like. It's just turning your hand over. How hard can this be? But I promise you, I am still learning ways of making this adjustment wrong and also ways of making this adjustment better. As Dr. Blair himself would have said, is that this is a technique that you will never fully master. However, it will be one where you are always improving. And I believe firmly that the difference between the docs who have been doing this, true masters, for 40 years and the rest of us, is that they, in their initial learning, massive amounts of learning, but then what they've done is they've learned maybe 12 tiny little details that each one is the next quantum leap. Right now, we can't even begin to give you all of those details. I think I've given you quite more than enough. For right now, just the act of turning your hand over. Again, doing it in this position, but then also doing it in this position is of great value to get used to the idea, because this is the position where you're actually going to be doing the adjustments for people. But between the basic toggle recoil drills, the basic toggle recoil movement like this, and now the one that we talk about as far as the Blair torque recoil movement, I think this is going to be more than enough to get you going on that first step towards mastery. There's a long way to go for any and all of us, but I will wish you good luck as you're starting to practice all of these different kinds of drills, these different activities. Ultimately, the better repetition, the better practice you do, the more successful you will become. I still do these drills, these exercises every single day. I've been doing this work for only 8 years, but I still do this stuff every single day, including reps of all of the different adjustments before I'm going to start every single shift in the morning and also in the afternoon. So I'd encourage you that as you're doing this, take the same level of dedication ultimately towards everything that we are doing. Anyway, good luck with all of these drills and these activities, and I look forward to working with you all for the actual seminar shortly. Take care.